Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another segment of our After Hour Screen Talk. And today's like a special video, particularly since my bro and I, Dan right here, were able to do this in person. We live in separate states here, so that's why we have to do most of our videos via Zoom and so forth. So this has been a pleasure to be able to do this in person.
Totally.
Yeah, and
Happy holidays, everyone.
yeah, happy holidays. And we're going to be taking a deeper dive into Poor Things. Recently, we did like an out of theater reaction to that, which you can go check out on our channel. But today, we're just going to give a fuller review of it and also go into kind of spoiler territory a little bit, just as a warning for those of you who haven't seen the movie. The movie is set in Victorian England. Emma Stone plays Bella Baxter, this pregnant woman who dies very tragically. Her corpse comes into the hands of this surgeon, Godwin Baxter, played by Willem Dafoe. He swaps her brain with that of her unborn child. She awakens in this reanimated form with this child's brain. Also, this lawyer, played by Mark Ruffalo, whose name is Duncan Wedderburn, comes into the picture, and then she elopes with him and goes on a hedonistic journey across Europe and other parts of the world. The director, Yorgos Lanthimos, he brings the same kind of surreal, macabre, grotesque tone to this movie that he has in his previous work.
I think he's a really interesting director. I think he has provocative ideas. So I'm always intellectually stimulated, but the more inconsistent thing about him is whether or not I'm going to be engaged on a kind of visceral, emotional level. He's a very, I think his mind works very analytically. So one of the things we can talk about that I liked really well about this film is that I think it's a much more sumptuous, visceral, kind of emotional journey than tends to be the case for his films. Casting Emma Stone and the partnership that's developing between her and Lanthimos is really exciting because he's fundamentally a director of comedies, dark comedies, of course. But Emma Stone, I think, being as gifted in comedy as she is, she really carries the material here. And the reason it is as funny as it is because of her performance.
I think the humor comes in by the film engaging us with the Victorian kind of expectations and propriety and views there, particularly how men should act and how women. And one thing this film, I think, does very cleverly too is show how men are also upheld to this unrealistic standard and ideal of manhood. And then watching that break down through these characters, particularly Mark Ruffalo, how they control and their desire to control women and control their sexuality and their bodies, and then losing that control. It just becomes these incredibly comedic moments where you see Mark Ruffalo breaking down. He's crying. He's having meltdowns. He's
Banging his head on the tables.
he becomes a child, just even more so at times than Emma Stone. Emma Stone, there's a role reversal where she's acting more like the mature, seasoned adult, and he's acting like the big baby.
Well, and that's one of the fascinating things about the film is that as the Bella character is growing and maturing, becoming, who she's eventually going to become, the more or less exclusively, well, not exclusively, but mostly male characters around her stagnate. They have some time with her, but then she grows out of them. She gets older and wiser and more worldly than they are, and the Duncan Wedderburn character is a case of that. I mean, right? He was meaningful and useful to her journey for a little while, but then eventually he becomes a drag,
Yeah.
and he's exposed as a guy who's just kind of, he's done growing in whatever fashion he was supposed to grow. He is who he is, and he's not experiencing any more growth, and eventually she ages out of him.
Yeah.
And that happens, I think, in more than one case throughout the film. She ages out of the experiences, the moments she's having, and has to move on. I think the film, even though it's a period piece, an alternative, kind of fantastical period piece, it's also very topical. It has a lot to say, I think, about our contemporary period, because the Bella character moves, I think, eventually, at least in my interpretation, I think by the end of the film, she's no longer in a space of hedonism. She's in a formation of sexuality and domesticity that is her own, that is personal, something that she's fashioned out of her experiences. And it more resembles the kind of unconventional polyamorous relationships that are, um, kind of
Yeah.
one of the focal points of our discussions nowadays about human sexuality and about domesticity and relationships and the whole idea of a throuple, because that seems to be the formation we're at by the end of the film. So Bella is with Max, married to Max, but now also living with them is her friend that she meets at the bordello, whose name I forget. And they are romantically linked. One of her formative sexual experiences is with this woman,
Yeah.
and so she's a friend, but also a romantic partner. And there's a kind of triadic romantic formation there at the end of the film.
Yeah.
So it doesn't resemble the traditional, you know, couple, the patriarchal couple, but it's no longer the unrestrained, casual, spontaneous hedonism that characterized her earlier sexual adventures. It's some kind of new thing that represents her maturity by the end of the film.
The film uh, does show sex work in a like you said, a refreshing light, in the sense that it's not shaming that kind of work, but it also doesn't try to conceal the abuse that happens within it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, many of the scenes of her servicing the Johns are explicitly unpleasant. And the idea, if there's any shame that attaches to those moments, it attaches to the Johns. Because one of the recurring themes in the film is the sadistic motivation behind heterosexual male fetishes. And so one of the things her madam says to her, and this shocks her, she thinks it's monstrous, and of course I agree, is that many of these men enjoy the idea that the women that they're with don't enjoy this activity. So the idea is it's about
Right.
domination and control. And the whole film is really about that, is about Bella's journey trying to navigate the fact that she's constantly surrounded by systems and by men who are trying to control her, trying to dominate her, in order to satisfy their own appetites, their own
Yeah.
visions of themselves, of what's proper, of what's acceptable, but really not really even about propriety. At a certain point, it's just about what I want. I want you. I'm a man, you're a woman. I'm going to dominate you because that's the paradigm that we're in, and that's what's appropriate. So even a libertine like Duncan eventually exposes himself as subject to that point of view.
So now I want to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about this doctor surgeon played by Willem Dafoe, Godwin Baxter. He relates to Bella Baxter as a daughter figure. She relates to him as a father. Her nickname for him is God. So in her eyes, he's her creator, her father. You know,
Well, in actuality, too. I mean, he is
in a manner, yeah.
In a manner of speaking.
Yeah. And so there's that parent-child relationship there. And you learn a bit about his history. He has experimented on himself. His whole approach to the normal is completely grotesque in terms of the body. Like for him, the body is something that can be dismembered and disassembled and put back together in a different form.
And human beings and animals, they're objects for study. They're not fundamentally autonomous beings who have their own inherent rights. They're material for his scientific fetishism.
Yeah, he creates these hybrids of animals like roosters and pigs, and does it without any, empathy.
Well, the interesting thing about him is that he doesn't, except where Bella's concerned. Bella is the strange exception in his universe. He clearly has sentiment and feeling for her.
Yeah.
And that humanizes him, because without that, he's just this monstrous Frankenstein character.
It humanizes him to the degree that he has this narcissistic relationship with her, because one thing you learn about him is that he's a eunuch. He's unable to create life in the normal or physical way, so he creates life in this more kind of scientific, monstrous, and bizarre way. And she's his creation, so there's that joy at seeing a reflection in his eyes of himself.
And there's an erotic valence to their relationship as well. Max is talking to him about Bella. He said, when I first met her, I thought you had developed her as a companion for yourself, and that's when the whole
Yeah.
idea comes up that Godwin is a eunuch, but he proffers that as an explanation for why she isn't his companion, and the implication is that otherwise she would be.
Yeah.
That he is interested in her in that way. That there is that shadowy, kind of sexual fetishistic attitude towards her working behind the scenes, and it's just this biological limitation that's preventing him from actually acting out that fantasy.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one of the creepier, darker moments. But it serves again to play up this idea that she's constantly under the shadow of these threatening straight male characters and their appetites.
Yeah. And regarding that sexual undercurrent, I now don't quote me on this, but I think in the original novel, from what I heard, is that his character did create her as a companion or potential companion. So maybe that's like a element that they just suggest in the movie.
Sure.
It was a more fleshed out in the actual novel. But I don't know. I haven't read the novel. I'm not familiar with it.
Me neither.
But that's just from a little like research I did on it. And again, to the style of the movie, I think it does a beautiful, amazing job telling her story and the story of her coming of age and her sexual awakening, and doing that through the environment, the locations, and her wardrobe. This grotesque wardrobe that's like completely expresses herself and her kind of like, childlike sense.
Stone's performance comes into play here as well because, of course, as she goes through the film, she's experiencing not just an emotional and intellectual development, but also a physical one, because she's learning how to use her body. She's gaining greater motor control over her movements and greater dexterity, so just like a child does. And so in the early going of the film, she's walking around like a toddler, kind of like, and I was trying to do that the other day because I was thinking, well, this is just a kind of pantomime of child walk,
Yes.
But then I tried
exactly.
to do it. I tried to do it myself, and it's like it's not the easiest thing to affect. So Stone obviously worked really hard on that and to make it look convincing.
Well, I just want to touch is a pantomime of a child. A brilliant thing about that physical performance that she does is it also has this sense of a puppet automaton too.
Very much
so it's unnerving to see her physical, the mechanics of how she moves is very almost uncanny valley, because she's this reanimated corpse. She's not like literally like a puppet or automaton or a robot, but there's that kind of artificial kind of
the movements do have that quality,
artificiality to her movements. Yeah.
The other thing I think we should mention about her movements and about her affect and the fact that she is this child in the early going of the film, it really is a creepy condemnation, again, of straight heterosexual male desire, because all the characters, the Duncan Wedderburn, Max, who's a more positive figure, they both fall in love with her and come under her spell when she's essentially still a kind of struggling, gibberish speaking toddler character. So it's a real commentary on straight male sexuality and fetishization of these sort of like infantile, childlike female characters, and it's one of the things I found myself really consciously uncomfortable with, but also provoked by, because it's like, so the film is clearly putting that paradigm, that heterosexual male paradigm, on the spot here.
Yeah.
I think this film is interesting because the whole question of binaries, light and dark, good and evil, normal and abnormal especially, binaries just don't apply in this film. I think the film dismisses them from the get-go. The whole question of what's normal, what's abnormal. I mean, Bella's journey isn't about finding her normal or finding a normal, finding something acceptable. It's about finding a place or a position for herself in which her agency is possible so that she can act out her desires. I think that one of the most provocative things about Lanthimos' films is that binary is consistently undone. And the whole question of what's normal, what's abnormal, we can't even raise the question of that binary. We have to use different language to arrive at a sense of what's actually going on, what's at stake in the stories that he tells. Because I mean, I think from a certain point of view, these male heterosexual fetishes, they're perfectly normal and natural from a certain point of view.
Yeah,
But
very
they're
much
also
so.
abusive. They're monstrous. They're manipulative. They're all about domination. The fetish is all about controlling other people, other bodies, other subjects, and having power over them. And maybe that's evolutionarily legible. Maybe it's natural in a kind of base evolutionary way. But to call it normal, to call it natural, is hardly to settle the question when you look at it in those terms. We're always dealing with the question of power and domination in Lanthimos' films.
Yeah.
Who has agency, and what is the cost, what is the context of that agency?
Yeah. That's brought out again when you discover the secret to her past, where she was in this marriage with a sadistic husband. When you go to his estate, like he abuses all his servants. He has this sadistic relationship with his servants, psychologically abuses them, if not physically as well. It suggested that her appetites were kind of similar on the same spectrum as her past husbands, that she had this sadistic proclivity as well. That's not really explored too much, but it's suggested. And I thought that was interesting in the sense that the conceit of this movie is that she's reborn again almost as a child and gets to come of age again and become a new person and go through all the stages and phases of development from childhood to adulthood. But that's again compromised with the fact that she has this dark traumatic past that still shadows who she is now.
Yeah, but this whole the kind of freakish prosthetic rebirth that she has allows her a second chance, a kind of redemption, if that language is appropriate. Because what comes out is that she now feels no connection. She's utterly divorced from this previous version of herself. Bella Baxter is who she is, and this older, formation. I even forget the character's name. She's such a non-entity. Victoria, I don't know.
Oh, her previous identity.
Was it actually Victoria?
I think it was Victoria.
Yeah, there's a play on words,
but
right?
I forget the name too, but it would be apt if her name was Victoria.
Yeah. She just feels no connection with it. There's no past memories, no shadow. The only shadow of her past comes in the form of that awful husband of hers. She's made a new life for herself, and it's kind of exhilarating, this idea of autonomy and freedom that she's aiming at.
Yeah. Well, and I think even with her past, and just to go back to what I was saying, okay, if she in a certain way played into these like aristocratic power class dynamics, then in terms of the progression and transformation of who she becomes, she does become a more moral person, because there's a whole scene where she, on this cruise ship, she meets this cynic, and he kind of gives her an education, and he shows her like the impoverished, destitute underclasses, and that's she has a psychological break when she sees that. It's too much for her to see all that suffering. The way that is visualized in the movie is very striking. And it's visualized in this almost like damnation hell scene where you see all the poor in this like hellish, grotesque scene.
It's a wonderful commentary on capitalism, modern capitalism, because that's exactly what you see in capitalism. Because she sees it from her cruise ship. The slum is right there. It's feet away from her.
Yeah.
And that's what you see, of course, in our societies as well. You've got affluent, privileged communities abutting up against slums, against poor neighborhoods, side by side.
Yeah.
And we don't, and then Bella has a breakdown and experiences a moral awakening around this revelation. But then everyone else in the film, and of course in real life as well, most of us just let it pass. It's customary. The slum is what it is, and you can't change it.
That's a great example of how space and environments in those movies are symbolic spaces. They are kind of evolving and changing with the character. So they're wandering almost through this imaginative psychological terrain that's very symbolic. And so everything you're seeing in the movie exists in this kind of otherworldly, symbolic realm. And that's a great example when she sees the underclasses there. That's purely like a symbolic space, you know?
Yeah, but it's a fascinating commentary on desire, and it's a wonderful world. You talk about the world building. When Bella sets out for her journey, the world is cut to the measure of her desire. Almost, it's this space that's just utterly suited to her exploration. Everything she needs, she finds there.
Yeah.
So even as it's a compromised space, a space beset by power and domination, beset by predatory men and dangers in that form, she also consistently finds room for maneuver in these spaces to grow and develop, experiment with her appetites, experiment with her desires,
Yes.
and eventually get where she is at the end of the film, which I think of it as an unqualified happy ending myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, back to the brothel scene with the various Johns there, she's trying to educate them as well in kind of having a mutual experience of pleasure. Now, that doesn't always work out.
Yeah, no, and I think one of the sequences with her Johns where she tells a joke and they have this laugh together, that's a very warming scene, right? And that's where you realize that, again, here, even in this most compromised of spaces, she's finding room for maneuver.
And in those scenes too, you're realizing that the men are as much a victim of this structure, this system, that they're not able to fully express themselves. And so when you see those scenes where these cold, hard-hearted, sadistic brutes are coming in to take joy in dominating her, and then maybe that's not really what they want. Or they're not fully expressing themselves. They're being held to this system and structure and ideology that is, repressing and victimizing them as well.
Yeah, and again, that scene with the joke with this particular John, there's another kind of relationship or relationality prevails there that he at least hadn't expected. And it comes again because she's in this place where she's open to experimenting with and doesn't make assumptions about any space that she's in. She doesn't have the ideological cultural baggage of the milieu that she inhabits. I'll say one thing about the final the film's ending. Jesse, I wanted to get your input. I feel like this is a place where we might have some disagreement. I just think it's an unqualified happy ending. I think that Bella is an utterly successful character from the standpoint of kind of classical comedy. She's in a space where she's found this suited, fertile paradigm for her desires, her identity, the people that she's come to care about who are with her, and that this is, in that sense, the film is a very classic, conventional comedy. But I don't know. What do you think about the ending?
I think within the context of the movie, yes, it's a happy ending. I think, as you've mentioned in certain aspects of this movie, every situation is kind of compromised. So there's that kind of dark undercurrent always prevalent. And I think in a film like this, like the question of whether a character is happy or not maybe is not what it's asking. She definitely achieves a kind of agency and independence and empowerment. And there's still that dissonance in the fact that there's a role reversal where her husband now, she's experimented on her previous husband and put the brain of a goat in his head. And that's a very kind of comic undermining of the patriarchy. But still, even though there's a role reversal, there's still like a power dynamic there. And so that's why I wouldn't see it as a pure representation or expression of happiness, because part of that happiness empowerment she's taking is that the sense of empowerment she has at the expense of her previous husband, even though he was an utter dick and asshole. He deserves it.
I don't think of unqualified happy endings as actually inherently pure. I mean, even classical comedies like Shakespeare, for instance, you know, so there has to be a cutting away, a loss. There's always violence there, right? The villains have to be dealt with, and sometimes there's a place for them at the end. Sometimes they stop
Yeah.
being villains, but just as often they're murdered, they're imprisoned, they flee. You find a similar formation here. There is no place for her husband in her life because he is an inherent threat to not only her happiness but also her life. In his old form, as he was, there was no place for him in that paradigm. Putting a goat's head in his mind and making him into a pet was the only possible way he was going to have any status in this new formation. Maybe the more merciful thing would have been just to kill him. This is a man who's going
Yeah.
to perform a clitorectomy on her
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
remove her capacity to experience sexual pleasure so
Yeah.
that he can be assured of dominating her, and then she'll be stuck in the paradigm of just
Yeah.
engaging in sex, or I should say
Yeah.
rape,
Yeah.
for the purpose of having babies. So there's
Well,
no place for him in her life if
yeah.
she's going to be
Yeah.
a satisfied, free, happy individual.
Yeah. Yeah. If he hadn't gotten his comeuppance, there wouldn't be that same level of catharsis at the end.
Well, no, that's true. I mean, my catharsis as a viewer does come at his expense, so that's a point well taken. But yeah, I'm not worried about it being pure. I think the whole idea of pure impure again is kind of irrelevant to the film. What we find at the end is grotesque and weird and strange, but it's also a space that is personal to Bella that she has made her own.
Yeah.
She's found her home, and in Lanthimos again, home is grotesque, home is
Yeah.
strange, but it's not whether or not it's strange or grotesque or otherwise. It's inevitably going to be those things. The real question is this a place where I as a subject can be myself, can flourish, feel a joy and a safety and a security, however provisional and temporary, right?
Yeah.
You
Okay.
know, so
Yeah.
but yeah, so purity doesn't
Yeah.
enter into it.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned with that at all.
Yeah. This movie has an incredible stylistic aesthetic to it, which is also not just there for show. There's real substance behind everything from the costuming, the sets, the visuals, all have this expressiveness that are serving the themes, the characterizations.
You know,
Yeah.
it's fascinating. We didn't talk about the transition from black and white to color in the film, which is absolutely crucial.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and when her sexual awakening happens, that's when the film shifts into color.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the cinematography is gorgeous. The black and white is just sumptuous and gorgeous. And then when the transition to color is equally sumptuous and gorgeous, and very calculated and carefully thought out. It's my favorite of Lanthimos' films, with the possible exception of Dogtooth.
Okay. Which I haven't seen Dogtooth.
Great movie.
Yeah, but I want to check out more of his filmography now.
Mm-hmm.
It's one I want to look out for. Okay, so that's our review and discussion of Poor Things. And let us know if you've seen the movie. What are your thoughts? Did you like it or did you not like it? And we'll be doing another video soon, so look out for that. And hope you have a good day, good holiday, and we'll see you next time here.